The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Read by Daniel Downey. Chapter 12. Inside Information. For a long time the dwarf stood in the dark place before the door and debated, until at last Thorin spoke. "Now is the time for our esteemed Mr. Baggins, who has proved himself a good companion on our long road, and a hobbit full of courage and resource far exceeding his size, and, if I may say so, possessed of good luck far exceeding the usual allowance. Now is the time for him to perform the service for which he was included in our company. Now is the time for him to earn his reward." You are familiar with Thorin's style on important occasions, so I will not give you any more of it, though he went on a great deal longer than this. It certainly was an important occasion, but Bilbo felt impatient. By now he was quite familiar with Thorin too, and he knew what he was driving at. "If you mean you think it's my job to go into that secret passage first, O Thorin, trained son Oakenshield, may your beard grow ever longer," he said crossly. "Say so at once, and have done. I might refuse. I have got you out of 2 messes already, which were hardly in the original bargain, so that I think, already owed some reward. But 3rd time pays for all, as my father used to say, and somehow I don't think I shall refuse. Perhaps I have begun to trust my luck more than I used to in the old days." He meant it last spring, before he left his own house, but it seemed centuries ago. "But anyway, I think I'll go and have a peep at once, and get it over and done with. Now, who's coming with me?" He did not expect a chorus of volunteers, so he was not disappointed. Filly and Killy looked uncomfortable and stood out on one leg, but the others made no pretence at offering, except old Balin, the lookout man, who was rather fond of the Hobbit. He said he would come inside at least, and perhaps a bit of the way too, ready to call for help if necessary. The most that can be said for the dwarves is this. They intended to pay Bilbo really handsomely for his services. They had brought him to do a nasty job for them, and they did not mind the poor little fellow doing it if he could. But they would have all done their best to get him out of trouble if he got into it, as they did in the case of the trolls at the beginning of their adventure, before they had any particular reason for being grateful to him. There it is. Dwarves are not heroes, but calculating folk with a great idea of the value of money. Some are tricky and treacherous and pretty bad lots, some are not, but are decent enough people like Thorin and company, if you don't expect too much out of them. The stars were coming out behind, in a pale sky barred with black, when the hobbit crept through the enchanted door and stole into the mountain. It was far easier going than he expected. This was no goblin entrance or rough wood elves' cave. It was a passage made by dwarves, at the height of their wealth and their skill, straight as a ruler, smooth-floored, and smooth-sided, going with a gentle, never-varying slope direct to some distant end, in the blackness below. After a while Balin bade Bilbo good luck, and stopped where he could still see the faint outline of the door, and by a trick of the echoes of the tunnel hear the rustle of the whispering voices of the others just outside. Then the hobbit slipped on his ring, and warned by the echoes to take more than hobbit's care to make no sound, he crept noiselessly down into the dark. He was trembling with fear, but his little face was set and grim. Already he was a very different hobbit to the one that had run out without a pocket handkerchief from Bag End long ago. He had not had a pocket handkerchief for ages. He loosened his dagger in its sheath, straightened his belt, and went on. "Okay, now you're in for it at last, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself. "You went and put your foot right in it at that party, that night. Now you've got to pull it out and pay for it. Dear me, what a fool I was, and am," said the least tookish part of him. "I have no use for dragon-guarded treasures, and the whole lot could stay here forever if only I could wake up and find this beastly tunnel was my own front hall at home." He did not wake up, of course, but went still on and on, till all sign of the door behind had faded away. He was altogether alone. Soon he thought it was beginning to feel warm. "Is that a kind of glow I seem to see coming right ahead? Down there?" he thought. And it was. As he went forward, it grew and grew till there was no doubt about it. It was a red light, steadily getting redder and redder. Also, it was now undoubtedly hot in the tunnel. Wisps of vapour floated up and past him, and he began to sweat. A sound, too, began to throb in his ears, a sort of bubbling like the noise of a large pot galloping on the fire, mixed with a rumble as of a gigantic tomcat purring. This grew to the unmistakable gurgling noise of some vast animal snoring in its own sleep down there in the red glow in front of him. It was at this point that Bilbo stopped. Going on from there was the bravest thing Bilbo ever did. The tremendous things that afterwards happened to him, nothing compared to it. He fought the real battle in the tunnel alone before he ever saw the vast danger that lay in wait. At any rate, after a short halt, go on he did, and you can picture him coming to the end of the tunnel, an opening of much the same size and shape as the door above. Through it peeps the hobbit's little head. Before him lies the great bottommost cellar of dungeon hall of the ancient dwarves, right at the mountain's root. It is almost dark, so that its vastness can only dimly be guessed, but rising from the near side of the rocky floor, there is a great glow, the glow of Smaug. There he lay, a vast red golden dragon, fast asleep. A thrumming came from his jaws and nostrils, and wisps of smoke, but his fires were low in slumber. Beneath him, under all his limbs and his huge coiled tail, and about him on all sides, stretched away across the unseen floors, lay countless piles of precious things, gold wrought and unwrought, gems and jewels, and silver red-stained in the ruddy light. Smaug lay. He lay there with wings folded, like an immeasurable bat, turned partly on one side, so that the hobbit could see his underparts, and his long pale belly crusted with gems and fragments of gold, from his long lying on his costly bed. Behind him were the walls, where nearest could dimly be seen coats of mail, helms and axes, swords and spears hanging, and there in rows stood great jars and vessels, filled with the wealth that could not be guessed. To say that Bilbo's breath was taken away is no description at all. There are no words left to express his staggerment, since men changed the language that they learnt from elves in the days when all the world was wonderful. Bilbo had heard tell and sing of dragon hoards before, but the splendour, the lust, the glory of such treasure had never yet come home to him. His heart was filled and pierced with enchantment and with the desire of dwarfs, and he gazed motionless, almost forgotten and frightful, the guardian, at the gold beyond price and count. He gazed for what seemed an age, before, drawn almost against his will, he stole from the shadow of the doorway, across the floor to the nearest edge of the mounds of treasure. Above him the sleeping dragon lay, a dire menace even in his sleep. He grasped a great two-handled cup, as heavy as he could carry, and cast one fearful eye upwards. Smaug stirred a wing, opened a claw. The rumble of his snoring changed its note. Then Bilbo fled, but the dragon did not wake, not yet, but shifted into other dreams of greed and violence, lying there in his stolen hall, while the little hobbit toiled back up and the long tunnel. His heart was beating, and a more fevered shaking was in his legs than when he was going down, but still he clutched the cup, and his chief thought was, "I've done it! This will show them! More like a grocer than a burglar indeed! Well, we'll hear no more of that." Nor did he. Balin was overjoyed to see the hobbit again, and as delighted as he was surprised. He picked Bilbo up and carried him out into the open air. It was midnight, and the clouds had covered the stars, but Bilbo lay with his eyes shut, gasping and taking pleasure in the feel of the fresh air again, and hardly noticing the excitement of the dwarves or how they praised him and patted him on the back and put themselves and all their families for generations to come at his service. The dwarves were still passing the cup from hand to hand and talking delightedly of the recovery of their treasure when suddenly a vast rumbling woke in the mountain underneath, as if an old volcano had made up its mind to start eruptions once again. The door behind them was pulled nearly to and blocked from crossing with the stone. But up the long tunnel came dreadful echoes from far down in the depths of a bellowing and a trampling that made the ground beneath them tremble. When the dwarfs forgot their joy and their confident boast for a moment before, they cowered down in fright. Smaug was still to be reckoned with. It does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations, particularly if you live near them. Dragons may not have much real use for all their wealth, but they know to an ounce, as a rule, especially after long possession, and Smaug was no exception. He had passed from an uneasy dream in which a warrior altogether insignificant in size, but provided with a bitter sword and great courage, figured most unpleasantly, to a doze, and from a doze to a wide waking. There was a breath of strange air in the cave. Could there be a draught from that little hole? He had never felt quite happy about that little hole, though it was small, and now he glared at it in suspicion and wondered why he had never blocked it up. Of late he had half fancied he had caught the dim echoes of a knocking sound from far above that came down through it to his lair. He stirred and stretched forth his neck to sniff. Then he missed the cup. Thieves! Fire! Murder! Such a thing had not happened since he had first come to the mountain. His rage passed description, the sort of rage that is only when rich folk that have more than they can enjoy suddenly lose something that they have had long but have never had used or wanted. His fire belched forth, the hall smoked, he shook the mountain roots, he thrust his head in vain at the little hole, and then coiling his length together, reared like thunder under the ground. He sped from his deep lair, through the great door, out into the huge passes of the mountain palace, and up towards the front gate. To hunt the whole mountain till he had caught the thief and had torn that trampled him down was his one thought. He issued from the gate, the waters rose in fierce whistling steam, and up he soared, blazing into the air, and settled on the mountain top in a spout of green and scarlet flame. The dwarves heard the awful rumour of his flight, and they crouched against the walls of the grassy terrace, cringing upon the boulders, hoping somehow to escape the frightful eyes of the hunting dragon. There they would have all been killed, if it had not been for Bilbo once again. "Quick! Quick!" he gasped. "The door! The tunnel! It's no good here!" Roused by these words, they were just about to creep inside the tunnel when Bufur gave a cry. "My cousins! Bombur and Bofur! We've forgotten them! They're down in the valley!" "They will all be slain, and all the ponies too, and all our stores lost," moaned the others. "What can we do?" "Nonsense," said Thorin, recovering his dignity. "We cannot leave them. Get inside, Mr. Baggins, and Balin, and you too, Filleen Killy. The dragon shan't have all of us. Now you others, where are the ropes? Be quick!" Those were perhaps the worst moments they had been through yet. The horrible sound of Smaug's anger were echoing in the stony hollows far above. At any moment he might come blazing down or fly whirling round, and found them right there near the perilous cliff's edge, hauling madly up the ropes. Up came Bofur, and still all was safe. Up came Bombur, puffing and blowing, while the ropes creaked, and still all was safe. Up came some tools and bundle of stores, and then danger was upon them. A whirring noise was heard. A red light touched the points of the standing rocks. The dragon came. They had barely time to fly back into the tunnel, pulling and dragging at their bundles, when Smaug came hurtling from the north, licking the mountainsides with flame, beating his great wings with a noise like a roaring wind. His hot breath shrivelled the grasses before the door, and drove in through the crack they had left, and scorched them as they lay hid. Flickering fires leaped up, and black rock shadows danced. Then darkness. Darkness fell as he passed. The pony